This is a National Geographic virtual field trip.
This is a great spot.
Explorers dig in to Washington, D.C.
Perfect place to take a DNA sample.
History, culture, geography, nature.
Let's go let this bird go.
There is life everywhere, you just have to look for it.
What makes the capital a place we call home. Hello and welcome aboard a National Geographic virtual field trip. I'm your guide, Krista Strahan. If you joined me last week, you know the drill. And for my first-time visitors, I'm so glad you're here. All of us are in for an adventure because today we're exploring Washington, D.C.'s wild side with two National Geographic explorers. In the Anacostia River, yes, I said in the river, we'll collect some of D.C.'s smallest but most important organisms. Then we'll get hands-on and do some backyard birding to see what feathered critters are flying around our neighborhoods. Through it all, there will be trivia questions, so pay very close attention. The Anacostia River is around 9 miles long. It cuts through the southeast portion of D.C. and is home to lots of different fish species. There are other things living in that water, though, trillions of them actually. To check them out, we'll visit the southern end of the river, a place called Poplar Point, which isn't far from John Hayden Johnson and Kramer Middle Schools. Explorer Gabby Corradino and these mysterious water dwellers will meet us there.
My name is Gabby Corradino. I study the different types of plankton and how healthy they are as the base of our food webs. We are on the banks of the Anacostia River in downtown Washington, D.C. And we are sampling for plankton. And we are going to see what organisms are here, and we're going to capture them using this net. So the word plankton is a broad term, and it simply means an organism that cannot swim against the current. Plankton can be found in a lake, a stream, a pond, the ocean, and in any water body in between. Plankton is everywhere, right? If you think about the smallest bacterium floating around in your local pond, that's a plankton. Plankton can be broken up into two groups. You have your first one, which are phytoplankton, or your plant-like plankton. And then you have your zooplankton, or your animal-like plankton. The zooplankton have to hunt for their food like us, while the phytoplankton can make their own food using photosynthesis. Phytoplankton, the plant-like plankton, produce more than 50% of our oxygen that we have in our atmosphere. So if you take a breath, think of plankton. Having a field microscope is really important, whether you're sampling on a ship or by your local river. One thing that you want to keep in mind as a plankton scientist is that plankton eat each other. And so we can't leave the sample just hanging around for too long or else it'll skew the data. So the sooner I can get that sample to a microscope, the better. And so having that field microscope nearby will allow us to take a look at the general, most abundant plankton within this system. The diversity within just a water drop of a plankton sample is huge, so all shapes, all sizes can be found within a plankton sample. So if you have a coffee filter in a jar, I'm going to walk you through a few steps so that you can do this at a local stream, river, or pond. So what you need is just a regular paper coffee filter and a mason jar with a lid. What you want to do is you want to take the coffee filter and then put it between the lid and the jar, like this. Now the coffee filter is a fine mesh, the same way that our plankton net is. And so what you're able to do is take a cup of water and you're able to filter it. And the plankton depending on the size of your coffee filter, will get caught on top, and then what passes through will be filtered water. And so if you do this very carefully and very slowly, and it's okay if you get water everywhere, it's part of the process, you will be able to see the plankton collect on the top of your filter. And some plankton you can see with your naked eye. And so if you squint really hard, you'll be able to see the zooplankton, or the animal-like plankton. Those plankton will likely be hopping around and eating some of the smaller phytoplankton, or the plant-like plankton. DC has several unique waterways, and the plankton that you may find in one river may not be the same as your local stream. And so you're able to sample along the same river at different points, or all of the different waterways, and be able to find different types of plankton. So I challenge you to get out there and see what plankton you can find.
Wow, Gabby, what a strange but super cool job. I knew that plankton lived in the ocean and could feed massive whales, but I had no idea they lived so close to our city. And of course, trees produce oxygen for the air we breathe, but who knew that phytoplankton generated the majority of it? I challenge everyone watching to bring a coffee filter the next time you're by the river and see what else you can find. Speaking of challenges, it's quiz time. Question number 1, true or false? Plankton are great swimmers. This is a pretty easy one if you're watching the video. False. Plankton may live in water, but they don't swim. They drift with the current. It's kind of like they live their whole lives in a lazy river, which sounds pretty relaxing actually. Question number 2, could humans survive without plankton? This is a tough one, so think hard. The answer to this question is never. If plankton didn't exist, humans would suffer severely, but so would almost every living thing on the planet. Plankton may be tiny, but the benefits they provide are massive. Okay, last question. What is the process called that phytoplankton use to turn sunlight into energy? I'll give you a clue. It's another word for picture. Photosynthesis, yes. Phytoplankton, which are those drifting plants, use the light from the sun to create energy. That's photosynthesis. The oxygen that they produce just happens to be their waste product, which, let's be honest, is pretty great for us. Okay, but let's get back outside. This field trip is Wild Washington, so let's check out more wildlife. Birds are everywhere. There are many different colors, sizes, and all sing a different tune. One of our explorers, Pete Marra, lives right here in the city and set up some special nets in his backyard to give us a closer look.
This is called a mist net. And they call it a mist net because it looks like mist. My name is Pete Marra. I'm an ornithologist, and I've been a bird watcher since I was 6 years old. We are in Tacoma Park, Maryland, just outside the district. We are catching birds, watching birds. We're doing everything birds. The mist net is the most common way we catch birds. If you're a bird flying through the forest or even a front yard like this here, you're not going to see it, and you'll hit it and you'll harmlessly fall into a pocket just there. And then we'll come along and we just harmlessly take the bird out of the net and put it in a soft bag, and then we can bring it back to our banding station where we can put bands on it, measure it, and do what we do. Magnolia warbler is this long-distance migratory bird that breeds north of here. Got a magnolia warbler, David. That bird could have been breeding in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Canada. Could have just landed last night here in Tacoma Park, and it's feeding, trying to fatten up to start migrating again tonight. And it'll head back down south to the Caribbean where it was last winter. So it could be going to Jamaica, Cuba, could be going to Central America, Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala. We are connected through these birds because we share these birds. Those birds are part of their culture. These birds are part of our culture. Next April, it'll migrate right back up to the very exact spot where it bred the previous year. Gray catbird. So this is a bird we caught this morning, the gray catbird. This is a migratory bird, but it's a really common bird in urban suburban areas like here in Washington, D.C. and Maryland. So we put these bands on the bird so we can identify this individual catbird.
Let's see, I think I'll put a red band on it and a green band. 5, 7, 6. So if anyone else catches this bird, they'll know it's this exact bird. This band is incredibly light on the bird's leg. Perfect. Big numbers. Now it's got a little jewelry. And we'll put on these color bands. You can identify who this bird is just by seeing the color bands. And not need to catch it, and we'll know it was the bird we caught on this day. So it's red on the left, aluminum over green on the right. Yeah, let's go let this bird go and let it get on its way.
You definitely should not catch birds and handle them. I did it because I'm an ornithologist. I'm trained handling birds, so I can do it without hurting birds. So the way you should appreciate and enjoy birds is through bird watching. Typically a little early in the morning, and look for birds. If you have a pair of binoculars, great, but you don't necessarily need binoculars. You can just go out and watch and look for movement and do things like pitching to attract these birds, and you can actually enjoy birds just like I do all the time. In Washington, D.C., some of the coolest birds you can look for and see, probably one of those is the bald eagle. Big bird, white head, brown body, and I'll often see them flying over the Potomac River because they nest right on the Potomac River. Other really neat birds that you can see in Washington, D.C. are things like the great blue heron, pretty big heron, long neck. It's one I really recommend looking for. And then the peregrine falcon. It's a bird that you can actually see in Washington, D.C., sitting on buildings, moving around, eating a lot of squirrels. You can even see it on the National Mall. The other neat thing about birds is that they are everywhere. That's what makes birds so neat. They are common. So I really encourage you to go outside and look for birds. It's an easy way for us to connect to nature is just by looking for birds.
Oh my gosh, those birds are so cute. I'm downloading a birding app ASAP to visit Rock Creek Park and find them on my own. Now, before we fly through, get it, fly? I think it's time for another round of trivia. Question number 1. What type of bird can fly backwards? I've been giving you a little clue. Hummingbirds. These little birds are some of the most amazing aerial acrobats. You can see 3 types in DC, one of which is the rufous hummingbird. The rufuses travel about 2,000 miles to migrate and pass right through DC. Next question. What big blue bird can be spotted wading around the banks of our city's rivers? Think back to the video we just watched. It's big, it's blue. It's the great blue heron. These birds live in DC all year long. They are voracious predators that eat everything from fish to rats and even ducklings. Oy. Okay, last question. Here we go. How many species of birds can be seen in DC? It's probably more than you think. Well, if you're super lucky, you could count up to 345 different bird species in DC. Lots of them are permanent residents, but many are just passing through on their migration up and down the East Coast. So get bird watching right away, because you'll see different birds at different times of the year. Right now, we're going to chat more with Pete and Gabby. Your teachers have sent me a list of questions to ask them. Hi, Pete. Hi, Gabby.
Hello.
So,
Hey, how you doing?
great. Thanks so much for taking us on this field trip. So I have a question myself to start. I'm so intrigued by DC's wildlife. How wild is DC compared to other cities? Pete?
It's actually really wild. There are a lot of trees in DC, and I don't know about you, but I can't think of many major cities that have a national park running right down the center almost,
Very true.
with lots of forest, and then you got the Potomac River. I mean, there's a lot of nature in DC.
And Gabby, what about you? Do you find DC to be particularly a wild city?
When we're talking all things plankton, absolutely. When you're thinking about the natural waterways that run through and around DC, there are thousands of different types of plankton that you're able to see in DC, but maybe not necessarily if you were to travel a few hours north or south.
So your jobs require a fair bit of expertise, but how can students explore birds and plankton safely? And Gabby, I'll start with you.
Sure, that's a great question. You can explore plankton right in your own backyard, whether you have a pond or a lake or a river. The only thing that you need is just a sampling jar. So if you go out and you have an old mug or something like this, you're able to see the really plentiful plankton just right in the surface water. And you can do that with pretty much anything you have in your kitchen, an old coffee filter or just an old mug. You can just take it, fill it up, and take a look at the plankton that's right at that surface. Any of those little dots moving around, those are all individual plankton.
Which is so cool to know. One trip to our kitchen cabinet and we have everything we need. Perfect. Now, Pete, for you, people have to be very careful when not when observing birds, but certainly in some interaction, there needs to be some consideration of safety.
Yeah, I mean, from the bird's perspective anyway, you don't want to scare the birds off. And for the most part, the birds, unless it's an emu or a cassowary, and most of the DC kids aren't going to find themselves in that situation, they're safe. But you don't want to scare the birds. You want to watch the birds from a safe distance. You want to let the birds do what they're doing. But the cool thing about birds is they're all around us. You know, even when you're inside your house and you're listening, you can hear birds singing or calling. And as soon as you open your door, there could be a robin, there could be a house sparrow. So we are constantly surrounded by birds. It really doesn't take a lot of work. You don't even really need binoculars to see birds. And so they're a wonderful way to get engaged in nature.
So true. And so it's a wonderful pastime that for you has turned into a pretty fantastic profession.
Yeah, no question. Yeah.
So let's get to the students' questions. This question comes from Munde Verde Public Charter School, Miss McCormick's 4th grade class. And Gabby, this is for you. How has the ecosystem in DC been impacted by human activity?
That's a great question. You can think about human activity ranging in size from just walking, off of a path and maybe disrupting wildlife and, natural grasses, all the way to maybe pollution that we may throw accidentally out improperly. And all of that is going to have impact, especially when you look at our waterways. When we're thinking about where all of this pollution will lead to, it's going to lead into the local rivers. And so just keeping an eye out and maybe monitoring our own activities will be able to help with that. So just stay on the paths or the walking paths on your trails, and just make sure to dispose of any type of garbage you may have just properly.
Good. The next question comes from Columbia Heights Educational Campus, Ms. Vasquez, 6th grade class. Pete, how can our students in their own community help ecosystems maintain its balance?
It's a really good question. And I think, one of the things that they can do is to encourage people to do things that we call are bird friendly. So if you see outdoor cats are not natural components of any ecosystems. Encourage your communities or your neighbors to keep their cats indoors. Encourage people to plant native species. Provide food like birdseed or water for birds and other wildlife. And make sure you're providing a lot of plants for birds to take cover in, put out bird houses. There's so many things you can do to encourage birds and to help birds persist, even in areas where there are lots of people.
And building birdhouses is such a fun activity for students and even at home. So it's great to know that adding a birdhouse next to your home could help these beautiful birds.
Yep, and it also allows you to see the birds up close. And if you get the right kind of birdhouse where you can open the side, you can actually see the nestlings. So it makes it a much more engaging experience.
That's so cool. And Gabby, this question also comes from Ms. Vasquez's 6th grade class. What can our students do to help better the conservation of our natural resources?
It's a great question. Conservation is an important topic for many of us. And when we're thinking about conservation, we really want to maintain and restore habitats. So whether you're talking about marine or freshwater habitats, or even terrestrial habitats with birds, we really want to see what our community needs. Maybe you do need more birdhouses to help the bird population, or maybe you need to clean up the waterways and to remove trash to prevent microplastics from forming. Well, any of these things are all things that we can do to help with the conservation efforts and really help maintain and restore the needed habitats.
That's fantastic. Well, let's keep going with the questions from our students. This one comes from Center City Public Charter School, Ms. Novak's 6th and 8th grade classes. Gabby, this is for you. How did you get interested in studying plankton?
I've always loved the ocean. I have been interested in marine science since I was in kindergarten, and I've just followed that passion and that love my entire life. There was just nothing better than listening to dolphin calls just on my free time or reading. And I met Sylvia Earle when I was a kid, and she's a very well-known National Geographic Explorer, and she just was so excited, to talk about her passion, and she just inspired me, and so I followed that all the way through school, and I finished grad school, and so I'm still continuing that passion and that interest of the unknown. Right, plankton is like these tiny but mighty organisms, and just that discovery it drives me every day.
That's fantastic. Sylvia Earle was your inspiration, and I'm sure for lots of students watching today, you are now their inspiration. So thank you for joining us today. Pete, this next question also comes from Center City Public Charter School. What impact have humans had on the environment, and how do you see that human impact in your work?
Yeah, so unfortunately, humans have had a major impact on the environment, either directly or indirectly. And we see this in lots of ways in the food that we eat. So when you think about the food on your plate, it may be a sandwich, you have to think about, how do we get the bread? Well, the bread comes from wheat. Well, where do we get the wheat? Well, the wheat's actually produced in areas that were probably once forest or once native grassland. And those areas are totally converted to wheat producing farmlands. Well, that's true for most of the food we eat. It has to come from somewhere. And that means it was a natural area that was probably converted into a food producing area. So the production of food is actually a real problem for natural areas and the species that depend on those natural areas, both in the terrestrial ecosystems that I'm talking about and the aquatic ecosystems, marine systems that Gabby is talking about. And so we see the footprint of humans all over the place. It could be, as I mentioned, cats outside that are impacting birds, or it could be a building, glass, big buildings that you see in cities. Those are horrible for birds. Birds fly into those. So I'm studying these things all the time, trying to understand, well, how do we produce food and minimize our impact on wildlife? How do we convince people to bring their cats inside so birds and humans can coexist? How do we have buildings? And maybe if they turn their lights off at night, which saves electricity and also protects birds, how do we convince people to do that? So for me, while I do the science, I also try to find the solutions so people on both sides of the coin are getting solutions that work for them.
And Pete, thanks so much for sharing those. Those are a list of really great solutions that a lot of folks that are watching can also take upon themselves to help reduce the footprint that we have on society. So Pete, threw this question in. This is one of my questions, selfishly. Why do birds sing? Is it always that birds are communicating with each other, or do they just want to sing sometimes?
You're projecting, all right?
I'm like, break into song later
do the
on.
same.
But essentially, my question's about the birds for right now.
I get it. I'm not going to do it here for you, but normally I would. So birds sing. It wouldn't surprise me if occasionally it was just sort of out of the sheer joy of it. But for the most part, we don't think that's the case. For the most part, birds sing in the spring. If you're in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, it might be our fall, their spring. And they're doing it to either attract a mate, and males and females both sing in some species. So females can do singing for the same thing, to attract a male mate, or a male sings to attract a female. You have to think about both males and females. And once they pair bond, then they'll breed and raise young. The other reason birds sing is to defend a territory or defend an area. So they're advertising, saying, this is my spot, stay away. I'm protecting my food, or I'm here with my nestlings, but I don't want to mess with you right now. And birds don't always sing. A lot of birds have really complex, what we call repertoires. And so they might have chip notes, or they might have warbles, or they might have really elaborate songs. Some species might have 30 or more different song types.
I won't ask you to sing right now, but maybe later we can have the students hear a song. Now, Gabby, this next question is for you. What are some of your favorite places to visit and work?
Oh, I love that question. I will visit any place that has water willingly, and I will grab, a plankton sample any chance I get. So I would say I love working by the ocean. That is my home. So whether it's in North Carolina or Connecticut, those are places near and dear to me. And plus, I'm very attached to those plankton communities there. So those are some of my favorites.
So Pete, I know we shouldn't catch birds, but when we're watching them, when we're bird watching, what are some of the things we can look for to compare birds that we see?
Yeah, so as soon as you look at a bird, the first thing you notice are the colors. And so if it's a cardinal, that you're going to notice the red, or if it's a blue jay, you're going to notice the blue. So you really want to identify birds based upon their colors and their shapes. So the second thing you look for is their bill. Is it a long conical bill? Is it a small narrow bill? And those bills really tell a lot about what those birds eat. And then you might look at their legs, you might look at the length of their tails. These are all things that help you be a detective, an ecological or nature detective, and be able to sort of then look at a book and figure out exactly what that species is. And so it quickly becomes a game. And that's what I find so much fun about anything I do in nature, whether it's picking up a salamander, and I bet you Gabby's the same. When she pulls up a slide with plankton, it's trying to figure out and then put a name on that plankton or put a name on that species. It's sort of connect the dots, and it's so much fun to put those clues together.
Yeah, it sounds like from what you've both said, you have a lot of fun at work, which is most important.
Yeah.
Thank you both for joining us. We want to thank all the students and teachers for watching. So keep exploring. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We covered wild Washington from the river to the sky. Thanks so much for joining me, and head to nationalgeographic.org/education to keep exploring. I hope to see you on another National Geographic virtual field trip.